hidden conflict ravaged the Muslim world, yet most people remained completely unaware it ever took place. For decades, two major powers in the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates and Iran, waged a covert and relentless war throughout the Middle East. They fought fiercely, but not with their own armies or lands. Instead, they operated through the territories, militias, and cities of other countries. What's even more troubling is that both sides were convinced they were winning. Iran built enduring militias that outlasted entire governments, while the UAE supported authoritarian leaders who crushed dissent ruthlessly. Both claimed they were defending Islam and stabilizing the region, but what they actually did was devastate multiple nations. Syria lies in ruin. Yemen is torn apart. Lebanon and Iraq bear scars too. Nation after nation has been destroyed, not by random chance, but due to this fierce regional competition. This secret war treated entire countries like chess pieces, moved strategically by outside powers. By the time outsiders realized what was unfolding, the Muslim world was already shattered. To truly understand how this bitter rivalry dismantled a region, we must first grasp what each side believed it was building. The most unsettling fact is that both parties had carefully crafted plans. Both held strong logic and were deeply convinced that history would vindicate their choices. Iran's campaign began in 1979, following the revolution that ousted the Shah. The newly founded Islamic Republic not only revamped its government, it rewired its entire foreign policy DNA. Iran's constitution explicitly required the state to support the struggles of oppressed people worldwide. Article 154 commits Iran to backing what it calls the just struggles of freedom fighters across the globe. This was not mere rhetoric or old legal jargon. It was a strategic blueprint, embedding permanent interference into Iran's very core. The weapon that turned ideology into real action was the Quds Force, the elite, covert arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps designed specifically for foreign operations. Their method was ruthlessly effective. Identify crises abroad, find sympathetic armed groups, fund and train them, then embed them so deeply within local structures that uprooting them would tear the entire country apart. Lebanon became the first testing ground. After Israel invaded in 1982, Iranian-sponsored clerics helped form Hezbollah amidst the chaos, establishing strongholds in the Bekaa Valley and southern Beirut suburbs. What began as a mere resistance movement evolved into a durable institution, an armed political party with its own hospitals, schools, media outlets, and a military force more powerful than Lebanon's national army. This blueprint succeeded brilliantly, and Iran spent the next 40 years replicating it across every reachable corner of the region. But here's the mirror image of that story. For most of its existence, the UAE was cautious, a small, wealthy federation focused on trade and survival. However, the Arab Spring of 2011 dramatically altered its outlook. As governments toppled and political Islam surged throughout the region, Abu Dhabi perceived an existential threat. They saw dangers in the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran's proxies, and sweeping popular uprisings, all of which challenged the UAE's model of governance and stability. So, the UAE embarked on its own covert campaign to counter these threats and maintain their vision for the region. Together, these two powerful Gulf states began a quiet battle that shaped the Middle East's turbulent trajectory, with devastating consequences for millions of people and entire countries trapped in the crossfire. The United Arab Emirates began asserting its power with forceful precision after 2011. Researchers at Germany's Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik documented how the UAE rose rapidly as a regional powerhouse by viewing the Muslim Brotherhood as a direct threat to regime stability. In response, they took decisive action against Brotherhood-affiliated groups across the Arab world, while openly supporting authoritarian regimes that shared their hostility toward political Islam. Chatham House described the Emirati approach as a blend of economic openness coupled with an authoritarian political system reinforced by a deeply entrenched security apparatus. This model outright rejected any ideology that might challenge the supremacy of the state and its rulers. Here's the pivotal dynamic that shaped everything moving forward. Iran pursued endurance by embedding armed partners inside fragile states, creating lasting influence through proxy forces. Meanwhile, the UAE sought control through forging security alliances, engaging in political engineering, and safeguarding vital trade corridors. Both powers believed that the future of the region was far too critical to be left to the unpredictable and often chaotic realm of local politics. When these opposing visions finally collided, their battlefield wasn't just the Gulf, it was far broader. Yemen became the crucial proving ground where these competing models crashed with devastating impact. But the human toll was staggering, almost beyond comprehension. According to a UNDP report, by the end of 2021, more than 377,000 people had died in Yemen. Strikingly, around 60% of these deaths were not caused by direct violence such as bombs or bullets, but stemmed from hunger, disease, and the complete breakdown of essential services. Hospitals, stripped of medicine, were unable to care for the sick. Water systems lay destroyed by relentless airstrikes. Entire communities were trapped without food for months on end. As of 2025, over 18 million Yemenis still require humanitarian aid, with 11 million of them children and 5 million teetering on the brink of famine. Iran's strategy in Yemen mirrored the one it honed in Lebanon. The Houthis, already a strong local insurgent group, received substantial support from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and Hezbollah, including in advisors, drone technologies, and missile systems. A 2020 study published in the journal Parameters outlined how the Houthis' capabilities with drones and missiles advanced significantly due to this external backing. United Nations experts assessed that critical Houthi weapons systems bore a strong resemblance to Iranian models. What began as a regional rebellion evolved into a powerful force capable of launching attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure hundreds of kilometers away and threatening vital global shipping routes. Following the outbreak of the Gaza war in October 2023, the Houthis intensified their operations, conducting sustained attacks on commercial vessels traversing the Red Sea. These assaults disrupted nearly 15% of global maritime trade, compelling major shipping companies to reroute their traffic far around the African continent. This escalation in hostilities drew responses from the United States and the United Kingdom, who launched air strikes across Yemen. In just a span of 53 days during early 2025, the U.S. executed over 300 airstrikes alone. One particularly tragic strike targeted a fuel storage facility at Ras El Zayurat in April 2025, killing 84 civilians. This was one of the deadliest airstrikes witnessed in a decade of monitoring the conflict. Imagine an Iranian-backed militia operating within one of the world's poorest nations, reshaping global trade routes while drawing Western militaries into a conflict largely misunderstood by the international community. For the United Arab Emirates, Yemen was never about reinstating a legitimate government. Instead, it revolved around controlling strategic coastlines, ports, and crucial maritime choke points. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow but vital passage linking the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea, stands at the heart of international commerce. Chatham House highlighted how Emirati strategy centered on commanding these sea lanes, with UAE-supported forces capturing coastal territories from the Houthi rebels and projecting influence along Yemen's southern coast. These are two rival powers with competing agendas, and caught between them lies a nation pulverized by conflict. This devastation has resulted in unending famine, cholera outbreaks impacting over 1 million individuals, and landmines that continue to claim civilian lives years after hostilities have ceased. Children are being born into a war they had no part in and from which they cannot escape. Yet, Yemen's tragedy pales in comparison to the subsequent events in Syria, a conflict that both regional powers fueled, turning the country into a fiery crucible. Here, proxy warfare consumed an entire nation without producing a clear victor. The scale of destruction in Syria is staggering and almost incomprehensible. By 2022, the United Nations estimated that over 306,000 civilians had been killed. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reports even higher figures, citing over 580,000 deaths since the conflict began in 2011. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry has documented how siege warfare was systematically employed, with civilians trapped, encircled, denied essential food and medical evacuations, and deliberately starved to force surrender or death. Nearly 1,000 medical professionals were killed, more than 7,000 schools were destroyed, and over 13 million Syrians were displaced, roughly half of the country's population before the war. Syria's GDP plummeted by more than half between 2010 and 2020, effectively erasing an entire economy. Iran's substantial investment in Syria was driven by a strategic imperative. Preserving Assad's regime ensured maintaining the land bridge to Hezbollah, thus securing an arc of influence stretching from Tehran through Baghdad and Damascus, all the way to the Mediterranean coast. The Quds force deployed advisors, coordinated militia operations across numerous fronts, and supported a regime that resorted to brutal tactics including barrel bombs, chemical weapons, and starvation sieges against its own people to remain in power. Meanwhile, the UAE's approach evolved over time. Initially hesitant to become deeply involved, Abu Dhabi reopened its embassy in Damascus in December 2018, an early indication that the Emirates preferred engaging with a predictable tyrant rather than allowing political Islam to gain a foothold in a post-war Syria. Chatham House noted that the UAE was wary of other Gulf states' involvement, fearing they had empowered Islamist or extremist factions. It was a case of better the devil you know. Then came an unforeseen twist. On December 8, 2024, the Assad regime supported. For over a decade, the alliance between Iran and Russia had propped up Syria's Assad regime, but everything unraveled in a breathtakingly short span of just 11 days. A determined rebel offensive, spearheaded by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, surged through Aleppo-Hamas territories and eventually reached the gates of Damascus itself. This swift advance abruptly ended more than 50 years of Assad family rule. Faced with the unraveling regime, Assad fled to Russia. Yet this so-called liberation did not usher in peace. No single armed group holds full control over Syria today, and the process of political transition remains fiercely contested and unstable. Since December, over 1/4 million Syrians have attempted to return to their homeland, only to encounter ravaged infrastructure, missing loved ones, and an unpredictable security environment. Disturbingly, mass graves continue to be uncovered, a haunting testament to the conflict's brutality. Entering 2025, Syria stands broken. Its institutions lie in ruins, its economy shattered, and its future uncertain, far from hopeful. Iran's most significant proxy investment in the Arab world, built painstakingly over decades with immense blood and treasure to keep Assad in power, disappeared almost overnight. So, if proxies couldn't maintain their grip on Syria or stabilize Yemen, what exactly have they achieved elsewhere? Elsewhere in the region, while Syria was engulfed in chaos, Lebanon was silently being hollowed out from within. Hezbollah, often hailed as Iran's crown jewel in proxy power, extends far beyond a mere militant group in Lebanon. Instead, it has become entwined inseparably with the Lebanese state, functioning simultaneously as a political party, a social service provider, and a military organization. No major political decision in Lebanon occurs without Hezbollah's dominant influence looming over it. The consequence: total paralysis in the country's institutions. From October 2022 through January 2025, Lebanon operated without a president or an empowered prime minister. This political vacuum endured for over 2 years amidst one of the most severe economic collapses in modern memory. During that period, Lebanese banks racked up losses exceeding $72 billion, while the national currency plummeted in value by over 98%. Between 2019 and 2024, Lebanon's GDP shrank by more than 38%. The World Bank noted that nearly half of Lebanon's population plunged into poverty, terming the crisis a deliberate depression, highlighting how engineered and avoidable the disaster truly was. Then, the situation deteriorated further. The 2024 war between Hezbollah and Israel inflicted a staggering $14 billion in damage and economic losses according to World Bank assessments. Lebanon lost roughly 40% of its total GDP within mere weeks. The education sector was hardly spared. Schools suffered $414 million worth of damages. Over 450,000 students faced serious disruptions to their education, while thousands of teachers either abandoned the profession or went unpaid. Once affectionately dubbed the Paris of the Middle East, Lebanon has been reduced to enduring rolling blackouts, long breadlines, and a banking system that bars millions from accessing their own savings. Lebanon is far from an isolated case. Neighboring Iraq offers a similarly troubling narrative of a nation infiltrated and fractured from within. After ISIS' sweeping takeover in 2014, Iraq responded with an emergency mobilization that created the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, a sprawling coalition of armed factions. According to assessments by Chatham House, the PMF now functions as a complex network of power, deeply entwined within the Iraqi state itself. The Iraqi parliament even formally incorporated the PMF into the official state structure, cementing this intertwining of militant forces with government authority. In 2016, several armed groups were officially integrated into Iraq's armed forces, supposedly bringing them under centralized command. But local recognition did not translate into full state control. Numerous factions preserved their distinct loyalties, funding channels, and separate agendas. Crucially, these chains of command trace directly back to Thrawn. Now consider what this signifies in real terms. Armed groups operating within Iraq's official military framework, proudly wearing Iraqi uniforms and receiving salaries from the state, yet strategically directed by a foreign power. For Iran, this represented the pinnacle of proxy influence, embedding power within the very legal and institutional structures of a sovereign nation. This influence could endure beyond elections, outlive cabinet reshuffles, and function independently of whoever held the prime minister's office in Baghdad. For Iraq's neighbors and its citizens, the country transformed into something worse than a failed state. It became a state functionally intact only enough to mask foreign domination. This pattern wasn't isolated to Iraq alone. Across 4 countries, we observed variations of the same dynamic. Armed proxies embedded so deeply, they became permanent fixtures of governance, impossible to dismantle without triggering further conflict and destruction. If you're still watching, be sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations, where we unravel how power struggles shape entire civilizations, not just headline stories. Here's the chilling detail that makes this covert war truly devastating, and sadly, the part that most people never witness. This was never a series of sporadic interventions scattered randomly across the region. Instead, it was carefully constructed architecture, an interwoven system designed to sustain itself over time. Iran developed an extensive network of armed allies spanning the entire Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, allied militias embedded within Iraq, proxy forces operating inside Syria. Each one was deeply integrated into local politics, economies, and long-standing grievances, intended to outlast any government it operated under. In contrast, the UAE established counter-networks, separatist forces in Yemen, influential strongmen in Libya, security partnerships across North Africa and the Gulf. For instance, a 2019 analysis by the German think tank documented the UAE deploying combat drones to support General Khalifa Haftar while conducting airstrikes against the unrecognized government in Tripoli. Further academic research published in Insight Turkey described Emirati policy as extensive military, financial, and diplomatic backing to Haftar, aiming to overthrow a government linked to political Islam. Why does Libya matter in this context? Not as a direct confrontation between UAE and Iran, but because it exposes the underlying mechanism at work. The model utilizes key assets, ports, drones, client militias, political engineering, often backed by decisive air power. The UAE's approach effectively normalized a regional marketplace where armed factions could reliably secure sponsors, ensuring civil wars had the fuel to continue indefinitely. This is where the spiral becomes self-reinforcing. Every militia Iran created sparked a counter-militia response from opposing forces. Each new faction generated fresh grievances, sustained black markets, and spawned armed groups utterly dependent on continued conflict for survival, with no viable economic prospects outside perpetuating instability. The ongoing conflict only intensified as so-called solutions ended up fueling even greater problems. Sovereignty ceased to be an absolute right. Instead, it became a fragile negotiation among militias, foreign patrons, and governments so hollowed out they lacked the strength to say no. The states of the region didn't merely weaken, they became dependent on the very actors responsible for their destruction. Over decades, both sides invested vast resources building an intricate proxy system across the Muslim world, pouring in billions of dollars, sacrificing allies, credibility, and any claim to moral authority. Yet neither side anticipated what would happen next. Everything backfired. By the early 2020s, the region faced strategic exhaustion. Despite this, diplomatic gestures began to emerge. In 2022, the UAE restored ambassador-level representation to Iran. Then, in March 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran, whose fierce rivalry had fueled much of the proxy conflicts, re-established diplomatic ties thanks to a deal brokered by China. But these diplomatic efforts couldn't erase the scars left behind. Bombed-out cities remained in ruins. Militias, now transformed into sprawling economic empires, were far from being demobilized. An entire generation had lost years growing up amidst relentless warfare. Then, in December 2025, concrete evidence surfaced that the proxy architecture was far from dismantled. The UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council launched Operation Promising Future, a sweeping military campaign across southern Yemen. Within just 1 week, STC forces captured territory spanning 6 governance zones, took control of oil fields containing about 80% of Yemen's proven reserves, and effectively seized what used to be South Yemen. STC fighters stormed through Son Pin, and dozens of military bases equipped with Emirati armored vehicles and Chinese-made howitzers supplied by the UAE. The offensive shattered the Gulf Alliance. Saudi Arabia, long away as coalition partner in the fight against the Houthis, retaliated with airstrikes targeting STC positions in Hadramaut. Reports soon surfaced that Saudi jets struck an Emirati weapons shipment at the port of Mukalla. Yemen's internationally recognized government then canceled its joint defense agreement with the UAE, demanded all Emirati forces leave within 24 hours, and declared a 90-day nationwide state of emergency. Pause for a moment to grasp the full impact. The alliance designed to contain Iran fractured from within, undone by the very proxy tools it had created. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, partners for nearly 10 years in the war against the Houthis, were now openly attacking each other's assets. The SDC published a constitutional declaration announcing the formation of a state of South Arabia. Pro-secession rallies erupted across Aden. Even cabinet ministers within Yemen's own government began publicly supporting southern independence, only to face threats of legal action from the Presidential Council. This secret war had come full circle. The proxy system hadn't merely devastated its target countries. It was tearing apart the very powers that had constructed it. And Iran, the original adversary that both Gulf states claimed to be containing, watched as its rivals dismantled themselves without firing a single shot. Meanwhile, the broader Muslim world was left to grapple with the aftermath and rubble of these failed schemes. Syria. Over. 500,000 lives lost and millions displaced. This is the devastating reality of Yemen, a nation struggling to rebuild amid shattered institutions and a fractured government. The death toll climbs relentlessly, with famine gripping the land like an unyielding force. And within this already catastrophic civil war, fresh conflicts ignite, deepening the turmoil. Meanwhile, Lebanon teeters on the brink, bankrupt and bombed, battling just to keep electricity flowing. Iraq stands sovereign in name only, its territory fragmented, ruled not by Baghdad but by armed factions loyal to Tehran. This clandestine war has inflicted damage far beyond physical destruction. It has shattered the hope for a stable political future for an entire generation. Schools have shut their doors, leaving many to never reopen. Hospitals lie in ruins. Doctors, engineers, and educators have fled, leaving a knowledge void. Children grow up knowing only checkpoints, shortages, and the ominous hum of drones overhead. Young men find themselves recruited into militias, unemployed and desperate, while young women endure the grief of burying siblings far too early. This hidden conflict has ravaged the Muslim world, yet those who waged it walk away untouched by the devastation they left behind. Iran and the UAE did not single-handedly shatter the Muslim world. The fractures were already present, born of local corruption, authoritarian rule, and decades of failed governance. But these two powers poured fuel on every crack, relentlessly feeding fires that quickly spiraled out of control. Iran entrenched militias as permanent sentinels of an ideological frontier, stretching from Beirut to Sana'a, while the UAE treated political Islam and state collapse as technical problems to be quelled through force, proxy armies, and strategic dominance. In the end, neither side emerged victorious. The true losers were everyone else caught in the crossfire. So what lies ahead? Can a region as broken as this ever piece itself back together? Or is the aftermath of this secret war the new, unchangeable reality for the Muslim world? We want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if you're eager to explore how power struggles reshape our world, be sure to subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode.